So, Jed, we talked last time about the research that shows that there really is an XXXY effect on on each cell and on how they express or sing, and also on the brain. And I found an article by Lissy Elliott, and April 22nd in the Conversation, and she says, I recently completed a painstaking analysis of 30 years of research on human brain sex differences. And what I found, with the help of excellent collaborators, is that virtually none of these claims has proven reliable. So we used to say, well, that women had more corpus callosum connection between left and right brain. They're more holistic. She says, no, that's only because women's brains are a little bit smaller that you can say that. And she says the idea of a male and a female brain is a zombie concept. So how would you respond to her? Because this seems to me important.
Well, I don't know who she is, so I don't know what her research is based on, so I can't.
She's a professor of neuroscience.
Okay. And again, I haven't read her research, so I don't know. I can only tell you my experience. I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm a psychologist. And I can tell you my clinical experience, which is that I believe that there's a lot of differences between men and women. There's a lot of things that are the same. In my various books, I quote the experts that I know. In fact, while we're on, can I grab one of the books of one of the latest researchers that I'm aware of? To hang on just a sec.
Sure.
So I just hold this up. I can't see, but
it says The Better Half on the Genetic Superiority of Women by Sharon, move your right fingers, Sharon Molam, MD, PhD.
Right. Which I thought this was a woman. Probably most people would if you read the name, but it's a man. It's probably Sharon Molam. But he's also, he has fairly significant credentials, MD, PhD. He's an award-winning scientist and physician. He's written numerous books, and, he's got rather extensive, detailed, this came out, I think, this year, looking at the new genetic studies that show, one, that there are significant differences between men and women, that they affect people in significant ways. And there's a number of others, males and females, so it isn't just men that I've found. So I don't know from my side that there's anything I can say. I'm not trying to convince anybody. I'm not trying to change anybody's mind. I'm simply sharing the research that I found and my own clinical experience. It tells me that there are significant differences between males and females, as well as significant things that are similar. There's a whole body of work that I've been involved with for years on evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology that looks at male-female differences through the animal kingdom and shows where they show up in humans and where they show up psychologically in brain studies. So I don't, at least from my side, I don't feel it's a good use of my time to try to debate somebody that isn't here, and I'm not really the expert neuroscientist. She ought to be talking to this guy or some of the other people, or you should if you want to get their point of view or want to read this book and get a better sense of what they're saying, but
It's really an interesting look into science and social science that
yeah,
it's not objective. I mean, it's not like clear cut because human beings are so complex and there's so many multiple
yeah,
variables.
yeah,
And you,
exactly. It's certainly not just biology. There's social learning. There's even genetics. We know with studies on epigenetics that the genetic actual markers get either turned on or turned off based on psychological, social, relational, environmental things. So, it's a complex subject, and there's certainly different points of view in studies. So I just share my own and my experience and what I found has been helpful.
and you also make the point that you, for example, test when brain wise as empathetic rather than the more traditional male systems orientation. So there's
Yeah.
a lot of variety within men, women, and whatever.
Yeah, yeah. His studies that he's uh, kind of talking about in this particular book, Molem studies, are looking at the genetics, the biology, and how that affects people. So if I'm a male and I have only one X chromosome in every one of my cells compared to every woman who have two X chromosomes, he's talking about what differences those make. There's a lot of other studies, including the ones you're describing, that looks at not just the biological effect, but the other ways in which brain function, relationship function may vary in men and women, and those that have traditional male qualities may not all be man. And that's what you're referring to. I've taken uh, it's another test by another MD, PhD, who's studied this, who looks at the different ways in which women as a group tend to be more empathic, men as a group tend to be more oriented towards systems and patterns. But when you take the test, I score way high on empathy, as do many other men, and there's women, obviously, that score way high on the patterning and organizational response. So that's a different set of, variables and a different set of questions than what the biological, doctors are talking about, or the ones that look at uh, hormonal differences that are clearly fairly different between men and women.
It gets even more interesting because I think there's some men with XYY, and they're people
Yeah.
who are born with undifferentiated
Mm-hmm.
genitalia.
Mm-hmm.
So we're a complex species.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Is the test, the online quiz with 54 questions that you've had a lot of people take, is that the empathy systems test?
I'm not sure which one you're describing. It's
54
not mine.
questions.
The ones that I have online are my own that look at male menopause and look at male depression versus female depression. Um, the one that looks at the empathizing, that's a different test. It's a different doctor who's got that research, and it's online, and he wrote a book about it. Um, but that's not mine.
You know, in terms of the spatial thing, I read a study once that women tend to navigate by landmarks. I'm going to go past this store and this tree, and men tend to navigate by vectors, kind of more
Yeah.
geometry. So that
Yeah.
fits into this theme.
Yeah.
And rats do that. It's not just humans. It's male and female rats.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, while we're talking about depression, I'm really concerned about the fact that increasing numbers of teens in the U.S. and I think in the Western world are presenting with anxiety and depression. And it's more likely girls to present, but could you talk about how boys, how they express expression and anxiety and depression as opposed to teenage girls?
Yeah. So I think given the times we live in, not just the COVID, most recent times, but the increasing stresses, the increasing uh, imbalance of humans in all kinds of situations, I think anxiety and depression are going up across the board throughout the world. Um, Traditionally, there have been studies that indicated that females experience anxiety and depression at higher rates than males, and that it's more of a female type of problem. That was what was the main literature when I did my studies back 20 years ago. And what I clinically, just in my personal experience, felt that I was seeing a lot of men, including myself, that were depressed and anxious, but the way you assess depression or anxiety or any other of mental problems is through a test. That you don't do it on objective clinical blood tests or some kind of physical markers. So if you're asking the wrong questions, you're going to, be biased. And that was my belief, that a lot of the kinds of symptoms that women were talking about as their experience of depression, I found were often different than the way men experience depression. But the scales that were supposed to be non-biased, that were supposed to be looking at depression, not gender differences, showed that men were less depressed than women. Well, again, my research showed is that if you ask different questions, if you looked at things like irritability and anger and alcohol use and other things that I think are more symptomatic of the way men more often experience depression, then the imbalance decreases. Whether it's equal, I'm not sure. Probably more studies that would have to be done. But what I developed a questionnaire that looked at, I call it the Diamond Male Depression Scale, that had 50 some odd questions, that may be the one you're referring to, that I devised as part of my study, that we were able to determine if you used this kind of scale, it was a more accurate way to assess depression in men and in males generally. And again, some women would take it and they would score, higher, because again, not all males have that kind of way of relating to depression. But as a clinician, I wanted to develop something that would be helpful clinically, that we were losing a lot of men who weren't being assessed accurately. And we know, again, this is objective study, that the suicide rate for males is much higher than it is for females. And I mentioned, interestingly, a lot of the gender studies, like Marianne Legato, who's an MD woman, Marianne Legato, started the Center for Gender Specific Medicine. She was a cardiologist. And what she found was the way we traditionally had looked at the symptoms for heart attack, which we assumed were true for all humans, she found that they were true mostly for men because men had been studied more. So this idea of pounding or pressure on the chest, radiating down the left arm, these symptoms that for a long time were viewed as that's just symptoms of a pretending heart attack, were true of more male type symptoms, where females had a different symptomatology. They more often had symptoms that were seen more as indigestion or a more general. And again, women were not being treated and were going home and told, take an antidepressant or an anti-inflammatory, and then they have a heart attack. And so she developed a whole set of things that were focused on females and started a whole institute where she looked at medical and psychological, all the differences that she felt were significant. So I think depression is similar in that way, that we have tended to see it more as a female disease. When you look at the broad range, you see it affects men probably just as much, but different symptomatology.
John Gottman and Sue Johnson have done the most scientific work, it seems, with couple relationships. And what they both refer to is men are much less likely to bring up marital problems because they have a higher arousal rate. They get more, I don't know if upset is the right word, but they get more flooded and withdraw because of their the way their body reacts to stress. So that seems like we really need to understand that men are more likely to get flooded. And what do you call that reaction that leads to flooding in the...
Well, I think Gottman describes it well. He did, some of that early research, and I think it fits what I've seen clinically. Men often don't talk about it because they're overwhelmed with reaction and they don't have words for it. So they either clamp it down, or you ask them, "Are you depressed?" "No, I'm fine," but they're holding it in, or they're overwhelmed by feelings. So yeah, if you don't understand, again, similar idea, if you don't understand the ways that men and women are different in these ways, you draw false conclusions from what you're seeing.
Right.
You see men being irritable or angry or checked
Withdrawn.
out or withdrawn, and you go, well, he's just an angry guy, or he's just he doesn't care or whatever, rather than he's depressed or upset, but he is expressing it differently because of a lot of physiological things. It seems that men actually have more reactive brains. That's part of the studies that they found, and so they've actually done studies where they'll hook men and women up to a sensor, and then have a researcher will walk by them and bump into them, and there'll be a physiological reaction. And it turns out the men have a higher arousal rate. That is, they get more triggered by it, and it takes them longer physiologically to recover. So they actually can measure that physiologically, and it then shows why we've misperceived many men, and we tend to misperceive women in different ways, or misunderstand them.
Do you think that is evolved because the 98% of human history that we were hunters and gatherers, it paid off for hunters to have a quick reflex and react, oh, the game is coming, oh, the mountain lion is coming, so I got to react quick and big and get my testosterone going to protect everybody?
Well, yeah, including themselves. So yeah, that's where evolutionary biology and psychology comes in, is that if you don't understand the way males and females were evolved in the 2 million years we were hunter-gatherers, you don't understand the total differences that still are part of our brains. Our brains and any other part of our body don't change that rapidly. So as you say, men, for the most part, not all men, but for the most part, they made their living going out and chasing wild animals. And so they had to be both very reactive to either kill it fast or run fast. And so they had kind of hair trigger reactions, and testosterone helps you do that. Where females, gatherers, spent more time with gathering plants that mostly didn't kill you, or at least they didn't chase you, and more time, with children who, again, the other side is you don't want to be real reactive. If, your child comes up to you and taps you on the shoulder, you don't want to react real quickly and slap them down thinking you're under attack. So women evolved a different set of reactions, different set of hormonal reactions. Women have, other kinds of, estrogens make women more likely to respond, and there's other whole set of hormones which that will be more prominent in women throughout, our evolution, that help explain why men are the way they are in some ways and why women are the way they are. It doesn't mean we're totally different, but it helps us understand, I think, and provide better understanding of ourselves, our relationships, and as clinicians, how we can be more helpful.
So let's say a wife is ticked off because her husband is sitting on the couch yelling at the football game. She's got the baby. She's cooking food on the stove. She's answering the phone, and she's angry at him. And he says, "George, can't you help? Why are you watching TV?" What would be a more effective way of getting her point across?
Well, I think partly just being aware of her own overwhelm. So anything that helps her calm down, where she can go, oh boy, before I try to engage him, I need to do some self-soothing, or I need to get some help, or I need to quiet my own reactive overwhelm. So that's usually the first thing I'd say to a woman who was in that situation. The second is to realize that because of the way men's brains operate, and maybe this particular man that you're describing, who is so focused on the game, and many sporting events and many activities like that, in a sense, simulate the
Hunting.
hunt. Even the if you're watching football, the teams, they're the Lions, the Tigers, all the sport. So you got to get that he's engaged in something where he's going to be very focused. He's going to feel, even though he's not under attack, he's not dealing with real lions, but emotionally he's engaged. So it may be that he's not interested in helping her. He may be just so totally focused that he doesn't hear or doesn't listen well enough. So the second thing the woman's got to do, or would be helpful to do, would be to say, George, I know you're really engaged with the TV. Can you stop for a minute? Because I really need your help right now, in a calm voice, but something that says, I hear you, you're engaged, but this is important. Can you take a moment to stop, mute the TV for a minute, and listen to what's going on for me? That can help. So she acknowledges that she calms herself, so she's not going to, George, what the hell are you doing? I told you, and he just gets jarred and either reacts angrily back or says, God, she's a crazy woman.
A nag.
Yeah, she's nagging, or what's the big deal? Why is she in a race? So she calms herself down, then she engages, that she gets that he may be checked out because he's in this other world. He's on the hunt or in a different world, and kind of gets his attention in a kind way, but then lets him know, hey, this is important. I really need you to hear me. Can you stop? And usually guys, if they're approached that way and they're not totally out to lunch, they'll go, oh, okay, or just a minute. Yeah, just let me finish this one play and I'll be right with you. It's on the 2-yard line, one more play. I'll know if they score a touchdown, then I'll be, and generally, if she hears that, okay, one play, I can handle that. Then he puts the TV on mute, turns around and listens to her, hopefully.
As a footnote, I think that women shopping is like gathering, like men, sports, hunting, women shopping, gathering.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point. Like my wife and I, with COVID and shopping, she does most of the shopping, and I've offered, well, why don't you just give me a list and I'll go sometime. I'll get you what you want. You won't have to do that. He says, but that's not the way I shop. I do have a list, but I don't know everything I want till I'm basically out checking things out.
You see something on sale.
Yeah, that looks good. That's on sale. I'll get that. Ooh, yeah, we got a party coming up tonight, and these are available now. They're ripe. So that's that idea. And I go, oh, I didn't get that. When I go shopping, usually I'm out for the hunt. I'm going after deer or bear or antelope, and that's on my list. And you kill those, you come home, job done. You don't go looking for what else might be out there because you have a more focused attention. So yeah, I think there's some truth to that.
I did this book, 50-50 Marriage and 50-50 Parenting, and what I heard a lot is women would say, the man can only do one thing at a time, where I'm doing all multitasking, and it's frustrating for me because if he's doing da da da, he can't think about da 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 or what I'm saying. So there seems to be, at least anecdotally, men more focused, women more multitask. Do you think so?
Generally true. Not always, but generally true. The other thing is that I'm increasingly seeing the importance of this is men and women communicate differently when they're talking to each other. In other words, women talk differently when they're talking to other women. Men talk differently when they're talking to other men. And often we don't realize that. So when men and women talk, I want to talk to you and interact with you, and I'm talking about my wife, the way I interact. And I don't realize that there are these two different ways of interacting. So when I'll hear my wife on the phone talking to one of her girlfriends, which is the only time you kind of eavesdrop on an interaction where if you were actually there, it would be different because you'd be part of the story. And it feels like she goes all over the place, and I get to the point. I mean, you go here, and then it goes over here, and how are you doing there? And, what, oh, you got a nice dress on. And I'm going, how do you ever get anything done?
And they repeat conversations in a way that men don't.
Oh, yeah. Somebody told me. And then when I talk to my friend Lanny on the phone, it's like, hey, you going to play ball today? Yeah, right. I'm going to beat your ass when we get out there. Okay, good. What time? 1 o'clock? See you on the court. Boom, hang up. And I realized over many years that the problem I have just communicating is when I listen to my wife until I really got how her brain works and how she communicates, I was impatient. Come on, tell me what you want.
Yeah.
And she's going on, and she doesn't get. And there's actually a really good book that really helped, a good research on this. The description was men duel and women duet. So that dueling, that back and forth real quick, and men compete with each other. Ooh, one up, one down, Women are generally, again, we're talking generalities, more, they're engaged in relationship. They're interested in multi-aspects. They duet. They go back and forth. They go from here to there. They're not so worried about getting to the point of, are we going to meet at 1:30 or 1 o'clock? That's all guys care about. Just tell me when we're going to be on the court, because that's, for us, the main event, the competition, the when we're going to, duel with each other. The other stuff is a waste of time. I'm exaggerating it totally. But when men and women talk, we need to recognize that we're talking different languages, but we don't know it.
Yeah, Deborah Tannen talks about that girls tell secrets and boys exchange information and establish dominance hierarchies.
Exactly.
So when you're in your men's group, you're talking for hours, and you're not just talking about when are we going to meet and I'm going to beat you on the court.
Right.
What do you talk about in your men's group?
Well, we talk about everything that women talk about. Maybe not everything, but we're much more organized on topic when we need to be. Like right now, we're planning my men's group, as you know, has been meeting regularly now for 42 years. And one of our guys is reaching the end of his life, and we're talking about one last meeting with him, and we're planning to fly. So we do Zoom sessions. And when we would have a normal Zoom session, we would check in, we'd talk on multi-levels. But when we've got something we need to do, it's business, right? And women can do that too. I'm not saying that's just men. But what we talk about in the men's group, because we've been meeting for 42 years, And because we're even in a men's group, I'm not the only one that has this more relational brain, although I'm probably more, you know, if you called it the female type brain than anybody in the group. So I talk more, I organize, I'm more concerned about the relationships. The other guys tend to be more male and, talking more directly. But we've gotten where we talk a whole range of things. And if women eavesdropped on us, they would be surprised at the depth of and the breadth. They'd go, "My God, this sounds like a women's group." I never knew men. When my wife and I do trainings, we'll often do a fishbowl where we'll have the men basically in group together and pretend that the women are not watching, which once you get into it, you can do.
Yeah.
And that's the comment. The women go, "I never knew guys," and when we switch and the women do that, and guys go, "My God, I never knew that's what women actually talked about." Because how do you know? If you're a man interacting with a woman, it's no longer a women's group, and vice versa.
Did you feel odd at first in the men's group talking about feelings and relationships in depth? Or did it seem like a weird thing to do?
Yeah. When I remember this is before this, I went to a conference where there were men and women, and they asked us to join groups, and I just joined a group with women, and it said, "No, we want you to join a group of same sex, so we want the men and men's group." The idea was to be relational. Well, the guys in that group, I thought, if there's going to ever be a place where I'll find guys that want to talk more relational, this would be it. And these pretty guys, even in this kind of feminist environment, wanted to talk about football, wanted to talk about sex, who's cute, who, she's kind of hot, and I was disappointed. I thought, God, aren't there any men? So yeah, I've had a long road, as do many men. It's gotten better over the years. There are now more and more men and more men's groups, and men are getting obviously more relational. Women are getting more, patterned and organizational and run corporations, and they're different skills, and women can learn it just as well as men can and have. I mean, women have learned to work in both worlds a lot quicker and a lot more easily, I think, than men have learned to be able to be more relational. We're still learning. We still have a ways to go before you have, I think, as much healthy integrated men as there are healthy integrated women.
I think a symptom of that is when I was growing up, guys didn't hug, or they might be distant from each other and pat on the back, but they didn't embrace. And now you see that all the time. Men of different ages, they really hug each other, and that seems to be a symptom of change.
Yeah, definitely is.
But I think there's still, with young men, you don't want to be seen as gay or sissy or something, so I'm pretty careful how I touch other guys. Do you think that's changed?
It's changed, but there's still, there's a lot more stigma of guys being accused by other guys of being sissy or being feminine. So there's a lot, being called a tomboy if you're a woman, and there's women that, hey, of course, are women in sports. But it's still more stigma for guys, and it's still more of a fear of guys being labeled, and it's changing, so it's getting better, but still got a ways to go.
There's a book about that. I've forgotten the author's name and the title, but she says that in adolescence, boys are really lonely because the kind of deep friendships they had as little boys erode because they don't want to be seen as gay or queer.
Yeah, there's a research, I don't know if this is the one you're referring to. Her name's Niobe Way, who did studies on young boys and 9, 10 years old, who were very relational, and even younger. Had my best friends, and we were close. We hugged each other. We were, best friends. And then as you get into adolescence and you get the kind of most men have had, males, the threats in the locker room, the gay jokes, all of that tells you it's dangerous and so we close that side off of us. And many of us then, part of the depression, I think, that men feel, back to what we were talking about earlier, is that we have just as much relational need and
Sure.
connection need, and we remember often from our childhood when we had best buddies and we had best friends and we hugged and we kissed sometimes, and we, not gay necessarily unless you're gay, but as we lose that, we feel in order to be male, in order to attract women, in order to be successful, I have to repress that side. And so men grow up feeling cut off, feeling lonely, and that's, I think, one of the main sources of depression for men, and something that happens even more as we get older, and male friendships get even less, and the ones we had die off, and women often have more friends to start with, and then as they get older, often they keep their friends and even develop new friendships. If they lose friends, men have a harder time doing that, and I think that's part of why the suicide rate goes up significantly in men as they get older, and it goes down for women as they get older.
How did you cope with and get out of your depression? You said that you went through a stage of being an attachment junkie, erectile dysfunction, ADD, depression. How did you get out of all that?
Well, it was a long journey. I'm still getting out of it. It started with my wife and I going to a treatment center for one of our sons who had a drug problem, and as part of the family recovery day, they gave the parents a really simple depression test, because they found that many families who had addicted kids had depression in their families, either reacting to their kids to alcohol or drug problem was stressful, or the interaction maybe added to that. So anyway, we both took a test. My wife scored high, meaning she scored high being depressed. I scored low. And the counselor who gave the test talked to my wife, said, yeah, I could see it in you. As soon as you walked in, I could see you were depressed. And so my wife then went back, got some treatment, and got better. And she said to me, Jen, I think you got some depression too, and some of those things you mentioned. And I denied it. No, I'm not depressed. I scored low. That was my proof. See? And so, well, I don't know. You. So I just denied it, and finally, kind of to quiet her down, I said, "All right, I'll go. I'll see somebody." Who did you see? So I went to. And the doctor did an evaluation, and his result was, I said we could quibble. In my case, I have bipolar disorder. It's another variation of depression, and manic depression, it's also called. Said we could quibble whether you're type 1 or type 2, but you got a problem. You should get some help. And so I came back, and my wife said, so, what did the doctor say? I don't think he knows what he's talking about. I didn't like him. He didn't spend much time with me. So what did he say? Well, he said I've got, but I don't believe it. So she was very kind, but said, So I said, I want another opinion. And so she looked at me very honest and said, you want another opinion? I'll give you another opinion. You got some problems. You need to get some help. And so I went to quiet her down. I still thought I was right. You got problems, great. You get treated. I don't got a problem. I'd know. I'm a therapist. Wouldn't I know? She said, well, you didn't know when I was depressed. You didn't seem to notice it. Maybe you're not noticing it in yourself. So anyway, I went to another therapist, much better, a woman therapist. I figured she would understand, And she spent much more time with me, and I really liked her. And I thought she was going to say, "Hey, Jed, you're fine." She said essentially exactly the same thing the other night. Well, we could quibble about whether you're bipolar 1 or bipolar 2, but you have a problem. You need to get some help. So I finally did. And I went to the therapist. I took medications for some time, worked on my relationship, and did that over a period of about 8 or 9 years. Was in treatment and got better and got some healing, and to a point where I didn't need the medications anymore, kept doing counseling. Our relationship got better, the depression lifted, and I felt like I still watch it. I keep scales to keep track of my own mood, my ups and downs. I changed my diet. I did a lot of things. It wasn't just medication, psychotherapy, but it wasn't easy to get me going, as you can tell. I think that's true for many men. So a lot of what I do in my clinical work is helping women understand how do you get through to men who are in denial, whether it's about depression, anxiety, whatever else. How do you get men to recognize it? And a lot of it, I share my own story. And a lot of people have said, wow, if you could be honest and share, and I see some of myself in you, so hopefully a lot of men can get more help by hearing my story, and hope more women can go, okay, here's how I can be supportive of the man and help him without making him more resistant.
People who are bipolar, the manic part is kind of exciting. It's like, whoa, I get a lot of things done. I feel really powerful. So it can be subvertive in a way because it feels good.
Yeah, exactly. And it does feel good, and people like it. You're personable, and you're talkative, and tell good stories. But the problem is it gets overblown, and you get too high, and you get irritable, which is, for me, was part of it. True for a lot of men. And then you crash, and way I described it, in the manic phase, I'd be juggling, 3 or 4 or 5 balls in the air, doing lots of things, very active. But then I see one more interesting project, or one more client, or one more book I got to write, and then I take that on, and I got 7 balls, and there's another one, then I got 8, and somewhere around 9 or 10, they all crash, and then I go, and then I'm depressed for a while till I start doing it again, or you get into treatment. So that's a little bit of my summary of a long journey.
Yeah, that's powerful. I want to go back into what we've talked about earlier, the 5 stages of a relationship. And I want to know more how in stage 3, when you're disillusioned, how do you, instead of saying, okay, this is the wrong person, I picked the wrong person, I'm going to go find another one. How do you deal with that delusionment if you're thinking, oh, you irritate me, I'm not attracted to you anymore, the chemistry's gone. How do you get out of that?
Well, it's not easy, because it's kind of like the opposite of the manic. In the manic, you just feel so good. In the disillusionment phase, you feel so bad, you want to get away, or you want to close it down. So part of the work that I've done in the book that I wrote, The Enlightened Marriage, where we talk about this, is that just knowing that disillusionment is a stage, not an indication that you picked the wrong person. Just that helps. But then we get into the understanding of, and when I give this to people, there's kind of 2 little things. I said, I know it feels like you've fallen out of love. That everybody agrees. Yeah, it's feeling, they have different words for it. We're not compatible, or we're always fighting, or we never fight, but we're just not that close. But basically, we've fallen out of love. So I said, leaving a relationship because you've fallen out of love, somebody said this, is like trading in your car because it runs out of gas.
Good analogy.
So if people get, yeah, there's something wrong here, but the solution may not be to get rid of your car. It may be to get a different kind of fuel or to refuel yourself. So part of that teaching is one, there are 5 stages, not 2. Fall in love, get married, or build a relationship and live happily ever after. If you think that's the relationship, then when you hit disillusionment, you think, oh, well, I picked the wrong person. If you go, oh, there's 5 stages, disillusionment is stage 3, and it's got these characteristics, and part of the purpose of stage 3 is to let go of the illusions that you've projected onto your partner of the ideal marriage or what you hoped they would be or what you were going to get now that you didn't get in childhood or all of the
feeling
the
of
projections.
familiarity because our wounds match. We know how to
Right.
do this, so
Yeah,
it's familiar.
exactly. Yeah. So then the other part of the work is realizing that a lot of the projections and a lot of the connections have to do with our families that we grew up in, the traumas that we experienced, and why we picked the person we picked, and the opportunity. Of course you're disillusioned, of course you're fighting, because you need to go deeper. This is a time to heal those wounds so that you can and then you give people the good news of, if you stay with it, you go deeper, you get through stage 3. Stage 4 is what I call real lasting love. And it's much more vital than what you thought of when you fell in love, because it's real. You get to be real, your partner gets to be real, and you get to really experience love without the overlay of the woundedness that all of us have some degree of from our families. And then you even get another wonderful stage 5, which is finding your calling as a couple, really finding what the two of you are meant to do in the world. So that's a lot of the work I'm doing lately is helping people understand and move through the 5 stages of love.
Do you think they can deal with stage 3 by themselves, or do you think they usually need a therapist to help?
It depends of, how wounded you are. It depends of how communicative you've been able to be. People have told me the book helps, to have a guide, so in a way I'm giving my therapy through the book. I have classes that people can take, so there's a lot of different things you can do between it isn't working, I want out of here, and you need, an expensive psychotherapist, although sometimes you do. And so I see people, limited number now, but I still see people in counseling and work with couples. But I spend a lot of time teaching, training others, and developing, different smaller little bites that people can take to help them move through these.
Harville
So I just want to notice we've got about 5 more minutes for my time today before I've got to get ready for another call. So whatever kinds of things you would like to.
Harville Hendricks' book, How to Get the Love You Want, I think also helps with get out of stage 3.
A number of good books, and his is definitely one.
Which other ones do you like?
Oh, there's, Harville's work is, I think, some of the best. He and his wife, if there was one, I recommend theirs. Of course, I recommend my own, and there's the Gottmans, have numerous books that they've done. I think they're excellent. Sue Johnson's work is excellent. So there's fortunately a number of really good supports and resources out there.
What I'd like to finish with is the men's movement. When I talked to Gordon Clay, he said that he thinks the warrior, developing the inner male, go to the woods and drum kind of spin-off from mythopoetic is the most active today. There's not a lot of action, and especially maybe in terms of grooming younger leaders. What do you see in terms of the men's movement today? What different branches are there, and what are their intensity or energy?
Well, I've been involved in all of the aspects of the men's movement over the years, from what's called the feminist men's movement that started, the men's rights, mythopoetic, recovery men was a group. What I found is that I don't think any of the movements, any of those, really capture the full energy of what men are doing and the big changes that are going on in men's work. So I call it men's work rather than the men's movement, because I think the movements, all of them, had a very small portion of energy, and none of them were as vital as I think the women's movement as a whole, because I think men as a group tend to do engagement in a different way than women. So I don't think there's ever in the past or ever will be this organized men's movement that's going to, have the same. There are aspects of vitality that are going on right now that I think are engaging younger people. There are things like the Mankind Project, and that is worldwide, that is vital, is growing. There's a group called Everyman that is some younger men that I've worked with. There's the connection between what I've been doing with Men Alive that's been going for 50 years and that draws in without the polarization of the movements, which tended to be opposed to something as opposed to looking at what's vital in the lives of men. So I think there's a huge vitality that's going on in men's work, and it's growing, and it doesn't hit the news. You're not going to see it on major television networks.
They're not marching on the street with banners.
And so, if people go to my website and others, I'm still in touch with Gordon Clay and many of the individual men that I've worked with in the various aspects of the movement. But I think this is a time where the things that are going on that are vital are not the ones that are hitting the mainstream or looking to try to organize all men. The idea that there are different very vital areas of men's work that are going on and are expanding. And a lot of it is building the bridge between what men are doing and what women are doing. And that's been my work over the years. Some way I get attacked by the ones that are movement oriented, and the feminists say, well, you sound too men's rights to me, and the men's rights say you're too feminist, and the mythopoetics say, well, how can you do it without Robert Bly and the recovery guys? So it's just been my personality. I've never felt comfortable in excluding or being in contrast. Which is the best movement? Who's right and who's wrong? It's like what works, and that probably comes from my clinical background of how do you help people? How do you bring people together? We need each other. There's a lot of issues that we got to grapple with in the world, and we need everybody, all hands on deck. Let's find out what's alive, what's good, what's vital, what's helpful, what unites us rather than what separates us. And that's kind of my work over the years.
So young men are in the Mankind Project, Everyman. Where do you see the young men gravitating?
Oh, they're all over the place. I mean, they're in all kinds of. There's a group called mensgroup.org, which is doing men's groups. They got a lot of young men in their burgeoning organization. There's, again, I'm kind of, maybe I'm kind of the old man of the men's movement. I've been around a while, but, I have connections with organizations all over the world that are doing really, really vital things in men's work. And I try to report as many as I can or share what I know or make connections. And there's hundreds of them, and there's hundreds of really vital things going on. And again, if you, come to my website, or I can, share and try to, my articles and partnering. So I think there's just a lot of good things going on in the world, but it's going to ramp up because we need more good people doing good work. So
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. I'll let you get on to your next one. Thank you so much.
okay,
This
take
worked,
care.
Jed. If you have the problem, this worked to use both of them.
Okay, all right. Well,